Welcome to Living Lotus Yoga Online. I'm Carole. Downward facing dog pose, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Probably one of the most quintessential yoga poses, and a pose we also see pop up in Pilates classes. Now, believe it or not, when we hold this stretch, it's actually considered a resting pose. However, a traditionally aligned and cued downward facing dog pose might never become a resting pose for you. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean you're practicing incorrectly. It just means you need the tools and the ability to adapt this pose to make it work for amazing you. So today I want to take you through a few modifications of Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog pose. So before we break down downward facing dog pose, we're going to come into the downward facing dog that you may be more familiar with, the way you traditionally hear it cued in your classes. So let's go through traditional Adho Mukha Svanasana. Come to tabletop position. Bring your wrists directly underneath your shoulders. Spread your palms nice and wide. Knees about hip distance apart, and then we'll go ahead and we will curl or tuck our toes. You'll take a deep breath in, and on your exhale, we're going to lift our hips up and then back, lengthening the legs. Heels drop down towards the mat. Draw your shoulders away from your ears and melt your belly towards your thighs. Downward facing dog pose. Is this downward facing dog pose accessible to everyone? No, it is not. So let's come back down to tabletop. Now there's a whole host of reasons why that expression of downward facing dog pose might not be accessible to you or the people that you're practicing with. So let's break it down. The first two things I'm going to tell you are something that you might want to consider bringing into your downward dog, even if you've nailed the full expression. Even if you are an everyday yogi, a handstand pro, or a complete beginner. These two modifications are a way to make downward facing dog a long-term healthy practice, a way to make it serve us throughout our entire practice, from now as we age, as we grow, as things change in our body. Come back onto tabletop position. Now I want you to place your hands, your wrist joints, slightly ahead of your shoulders. And the reason I'm suggesting that this might be something you want to consider is because it is just a way to be a lot more compassionate towards our wrists, which do a heck of a lot of work for us. We're bringing the wrists right underneath the shoulders. This is some pretty extreme extension. And over time, you might start to notice that you're going to have some wrist issues. So let's place our hands slightly ahead of our shoulders. And then, as we go ahead and tuck our toes, we'll lift our hips up and back, lengthen our legs. Even if you've got your heels all the way down to the mat, micro bend the knees. We're going to try to make sure that we're keeping the back of the legs nice and soft, lengthening through the spine, as opposed to locking out the knees and then beginning to add stress and strain to the legs and even into the low back. So those are just two modifications you might want to bring into your downward dog. If we want to break it down even further for different considerations, let's do that. So come on up into downward facing dog and slightly ahead of your shoulders. Bring those hips up and back. And the first variation we're going to come into is bending the knees. So just like I said, we'll keep the knees nice and soft. If we are experiencing any tightness in the hamstrings and the back of the legs, you're actually going to go ahead and bend the knees quite a bit. That is going to lift the heels away from the mat. What we're trying to do here is maintain the integrity and the lengthening through the spine, as opposed to having completely straight legs, heels down, and then we begin to collapse or even round through the spine. Integrity of the spine, nice long spine, bend the knees if that's what we need to do to get there. Another variation, which is going to be considering the lower half of the body, is actually to roll up the end of your yoga mat or roll up a blanket, and a block works for this too. We're going to bring this behind the heels. Now this modification that we're coming into is if we're experiencing a lot of tightness in the calves, back of the calves, but we're able to lengthen the legs, we're struggling to get the heels down towards the mat, or our legs are really shaking. And if our legs are really shaking, we're going to start to compromise the knee, and we want to make sure that we are not compromising our knee. We're keeping our knee nice and healthy, nice and protected. So prop your heels as you come into your downward facing dog. We might still bend the knees, but we're fully supporting the feet here. Heels aren't just hanging out in space, fully supported and lengthening through the spine. Another couple of modifications we can bring into downward facing dog pose is if we want to consider things that may be going on with the upper body. So a good variation here is actually to come into a dolphin dog, and you might be considering dolphin dog not only because it's fun, but also because it's really beneficial if you are experiencing or know anyone who is experiencing any shoulder or wrist issues. So if we want to take loading into the shoulder, loading into the wrist out of the pose, this is a great way to accomplish that. So dolphin dog looks a little bit like this. I'm going to drop down onto my right forearm here, and then I'm going to keep my left arm extended but begin to reach out in front of me and come up onto fingertips. I may bend the knees or I may lengthen legs, drop heels, and I'm going to even out the weight as best as I can here between the upper body. So here's a modification if we're experiencing shoulder or wrist issues on one side of the body. Another modification is actually to come into almost a variation of the dolphin pose, and this one is particularly good, again, if we have any shoulder issues or wrist issues going on. If it is causing us pain to be loading so much weight into our wrists, we're going to bring blocks down. We're going to bring our forearms to the blocks, so now we're not bearing any weight into the wrists at all. And you're going to bring your lower half of the body back up into your down dog. Again, modify as you wish, bend knees, lengthen spine, but we're only bearing weight here into the forearms of the upper body. This is good for shoulder strength, shoulder stabilizing, and as I said, your wrists are free. And the last modification that you might like to consider is puppy dog pose. It's overall a much gentler version of downward facing dog. It is also a good one that works really well in a flow-based class. So if you're doing your vinyasa or your flow sequencing and downward dog just isn't doing it for you today, but you need something that's going to still move and transition well between poses, puppy dog pose is probably the one to come into for you. So it's similar to your downward dog. We're still getting this lovely stretch and lengthening through the spine, but it's gentler. So you're going to place your hands out in front of you, and you're going to keep your seat lifted, just like we do in down dog, hips up. We're going to bring our forehead down towards the mat, and we will bring in a little toe tuck here, just to add that additional stretch for the feet. You can bring your hands up onto fingertips, or you can gently just place the hands down onto the ground. This is a little bit kinder, a little bit softer. Crown of the head to the mat, or onto a block or rolled blanket. So those are just a few modifications that hopefully make downward facing dog Adho Mukha Svanasana more accessible to you. If you have any other modifications that you like to practice or you've thought of, please share them with me and comment on the video. Namaste.